All right, let's jump right in, shall we? This deep dive takes us back to the glory days of 1981, and this time we're tackling a true slasher gem, The Burning.
The Burning. Oh, yeah, this one's a classic. It arrived just when the slasher craze was hitting its peak, hot on the heels of Friday the 13th. But The Burning, it brought something different to the table, a kind of raw intensity, you know?
Right, right. You've got all the usual suspects, of course. Teenagers, summer camp, a mysterious killer on the loose. But The Burning doesn't hold back. It dives headfirst into this chilling urban legend, the Cropsey.
Oh, the Cropsey, that one's a doozy. This creepy figure lurking in the shadows of Staten Island, he'd already wormed his way into people's nightmares, and The Burning took that existing fear, that sense of something sinister hiding just beyond the campfire's light, and brought it to life on the big screen.
And it's not just any masked killer, either. We're talking about Cropsey, the disfigured caretaker seeking revenge. What makes Cropsey stand out, at least for me, is that unlike so many slashers with these shrouded in mystery pasts, The Burning actually gives Cropsey a backstory, a reason for his rage. And it's not pretty.
No, not pretty at all. It makes him more, well, human in a way. I mean, he's the victim of a horrific prank gone wrong, and his desire for revenge, it comes from this place of trauma, this deep-seated pain. You almost understand where he's coming from.
Which makes it all the more disturbing, right?
Exactly. It gets under your skin, makes you think about those anxieties we all have, you know, about being different, about fitting in, about what happens when things go too far.
Now, we can't talk about The Burning without mentioning the names behind it, right? The Weinstein brothers, Bob and, of course, Harvey.
Right. They were the driving force behind the entire production. And, you know, it's kind of strange, but the film itself, with all that talk about adolescent cruelty and the repercussions of actions, it almost mirrors some of the things that would later engulf Harvey Weinstein in controversy.
Mhm.
Not a direct link, of course, but it definitely adds another layer to how we view the film today.
It's hard to ignore, that's for sure. But let's get back to the movie magic, so to speak. You can't talk about The Burning without bringing up the special effects wizard himself, Tom Savini.
Savini, oh, he's a legend. He brought his A game to The Burning, fresh off the success of Friday the 13th, and he pushed the boundaries, I'll tell you. Took the gore effects to a whole new level.
And it's not just the quantity of the gore, right? It's
Yeah.
that level of detail.
Savini's a master of practical effects. It's that visceral realism that makes it so effective. You're not watching a movie, you're feeling it, you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. It's that realness that makes The Burning stand out from the slasher pack.
Yeah.
That, and well, we have to talk about it, the Raft Massacre scene.
Oh, man, that scene, pure slasher gold right there. It's Savini at his finest.
I mean, that scene is just burned into your memory. You can't unsee it.
It's brutal, but it's so well done. You can't look away, even though you kind of want to. It's just masterful.
It's like the ultimate slasher scene. It taps into something primal, that fear of being hunted, of being vulnerable out in the wilderness.
And The Burning does it so well. It elevates the slasher genre. It's not just about dumb teenagers getting what they deserve. It's darker. It's got this psychological depth.
So far, we've got a creepy local legend, a vengeful caretaker with a real backstory, some seriously groundbreaking gore, and a whole lot of psychological tension.
Yeah.
Where does all this fit in the larger slasher scene?
Well, you could say The Burning took the killer in the wilderness theme, something that Friday the 13th had sort of laid the groundwork for, and it took it to the next level. It proved that slashers could be more than just blood and guts.
Yeah, and it solidified the whole summer camp as the ultimate horror setting thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like The Burning, along with Friday the 13th, they put summer camps on the horror map for good.
Oh, absolutely. You got a bunch of unsuspecting teens isolated in the middle of nowhere, a killer on the loose. It's a recipe for disaster. And The Burning cooked it to perfection.
And it's not just the killer they have to worry about, right? It's the darkness within the group itself. That opening prank, that's not just some harmless fun gone wrong. It's pure cruelty. It makes you wonder who the real monsters are.
It makes you question everything. The Burning doesn't shy away from those tough questions. It shows us that sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monster in the shadows, but the darkness inside ourselves.
Right, that potential for evil lurking beneath the surface. It's a pretty unsettling thought.
It is. And that's what makes The Burning such a powerful film, even all these years later.
It's a reminder that horror isn't always about the supernatural or the otherworldly. Sometimes it's about us.
Sometimes the most frightening monsters are the ones we create ourselves, and that's what makes it stick with you. You know, it makes you think about things you'd rather not, if you get what I mean.
It definitely gets under your skin. And it all comes back to those classic slasher themes, right? Teenagers coming of age, testing the limits, and, yeah, sometimes facing some pretty deadly consequences for their actions.
It's like a twisted coming-of-age tale with life or death stakes.
Exactly. But The Burning, it takes those themes and cranks them up to 11.
Oh, yeah. It throws those awkward and, let's be honest, often brutal social dynamics being a teenager right out in the open. All the high school stuff, the cliques, the struggles for power, that desperate need to fit in.
And all that gets magnified at summer camp. You're stuck with a bunch of people you barely know. You got to figure out where you fit in. And it's not always pretty.
No, it's not. And The Burning, it doesn't sugarcoat any of that. Like that opening prank, it's not just a harmless joke gone wrong. It's straight up mean, driven by boredom and this sense of superiority.
Yeah, it's like a microcosm of all the messed up power dynamics that play out throughout the film.
Like it's saying, hey, the real horror, it ain't just the masked killer up there. It's the stuff we do to each other. The potential for violence we all have inside.
It's a pretty unsettling thought, especially when you remember those kids pulling the prank. They're just kids.
It makes you wonder what happens to them later on, right? How those early experiences with cruelty shape them as adults.
Chilling stuff. And then there's that whole psychological aspect. I mean, just think about that raft scene. It's more than just gory. It's terrifying on a whole other level.
Savini knew what he was doing with that scene, the way it's shot, the slow build-up, the feeling that something awful's about to happen, and you can't stop it. Masterful.
You know it's coming, but you can't tear your eyes away.
And it's not just those cheap jump scares either. It's a genuine atmosphere of terror.
Yeah, like danger could be lurking anywhere, at any moment.
Exactly. The Burning knows how to play on those deep-seated fears we all have. You know, being alone in the dark, being hunted, that feeling of vulnerability. It gets under your skin.
We got to talk about Savini's effects more. You're a horror expert. You've seen it all. What is it about practical effects that make them so effective, especially in a film like The Burning?
Well, there's something about practical effects that CGI just can't touch. It's hard to explain.
Like a certain realness?
Yeah, that's it. When you see something gruesome, like a severed limb or whatever, made with practical effects, a part of your brain knows it's fake, but another part, it reacts on this gut level. It's like your senses are being overloaded.
Like your body knows it's real, even though your mind's telling you it's not.
Exactly. And in a film like The Burning, where the horror is so in your face, so visceral, that realness is key. It's what makes it so disturbing, so hard to forget.
Those effects, they're almost like characters themselves, adding to that overall feeling of dread.
They give the film this gritty, raw feel, almost like a documentary. You're not just watching a movie, you're right there in it. It's an experience.
So we've covered a lot of ground, the film's impact, its themes, the special effects. But what about its legacy? How does The Burning hold up today in the grand scheme of horror? I mean, yeah, it's a cult classic, but what does that actually mean?
Well, cult classics, they often start as these misunderstood films, you know? The ones that didn't quite find their audience at first, but then over time, people start to get it. And that's The Burning in a nutshell.
It wasn't a huge hit when it came out, was it?
Not really. Critics were all over the place with their opinions, but over the years, it's become this slasher classic, a film that pushed the envelope and kind of paved the way for a whole new wave of horror, you know?
Mm.
More extreme, more visceral.
It's not just about the gore, right?
No, it's that underlying tension, the psychological stuff. It gets in your head.
Like it's exploring the dark side of human nature.
Exactly. That's what makes The Burning resonate with people, even all these years later. It's more than just a slasher flick. It's about us, about the choices we make, about the darkness we all carry inside.
It's like it tapped into those primal fears, those anxieties that are always there, lurking beneath the surface.
And it did it with a level of skill and artistry that's kind of rare in horror, especially back then.
And that's what makes The Burning stand out, doesn't it? It takes those familiar slasher elements, but then it adds this layer of, I don't know, psychological depth.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about some masked maniac hacking and slashing his way through a bunch of teenagers. You actually start to see these kids as real people, each with their own hang-ups and vulnerabilities.
And that makes it all the more disturbing, right? Makes you confront some pretty uncomfortable truths about, well, about human nature. Like, is there really a difference between the victims and the, well, you know.
Exactly. The Burning forces you to look at that darkness that exists within all of us, that potential for cruelty, for violence. Even in a place like a summer camp, that's supposed to be all about fun and games.
Right, like the summer camp itself becomes this kind of petri dish, a breeding ground for those teenage anxieties and insecurities.
That's where the real horror lies, you know?
Yeah.
Not just in Cropsy and his weapon of choice, but in the things we do to each other, the ways we can be both the victim and the villain.
And, speaking of Cropsy, I think it's worth pointing out that he's not your typical slasher baddie. He's not some supernatural force or a boogeyman. He's human, even if he is deeply, deeply troubled.
Right, and that's what makes him so unsettling. He's driven by pain, by this need for revenge, and on some level you can actually understand where he's coming from.
Yeah, you can't condone his actions, of course,
Yeah.
but you can see how he got to that point.
He's a product of his past, of the terrible things that happened to him, and that makes him so much more interesting than your run-of-the-mill slasher villain.
It really speaks to the filmmakers, that they were able to create a character like that with so much depth within the framework of a slasher film. They could have just gone for the easy scares, but they didn't.
They didn't shy away from the dark stuff, that's for sure. But they also gave Cropsy this tragic element.
Like they're saying that even the monsters we fear, they're capable of feeling pain, that they can be shaped by their experiences, just like the rest of us. It's a pretty profound idea, especially for a genre that often relies on these black and white good versus evil tropes.
Definitely makes you think. So we've talked about the impact of the burning, its themes, the characters, but what about its legacy? How do you see its lasting contribution to horror?
Well, it definitely helped to usher in this new era of slashers, one that was more psychological, more willing to explore the darker side of human nature. It showed that the genre could be more than just blood and guts.
Oh, absolutely. It proved that slasher films could be intelligent, thought-provoking, and genuinely terrifying, all at the same time.
And it didn't skimp on those classic slasher elements either. The suspense, the gore, the kill scenes.
It works on multiple levels, that's for sure, and I think that's why it's remained such a cult favorite all these years.
You can watch it again and again, and you'll still notice new things, catch those subtle details. They're the layers of meaning.
That's the sign of a great horror film, isn't it? One that stays with you long after it's over. So as we wrap up this deep dive into The Burning, is there one thing, one takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember about this film?
I think it's important to keep in mind that The Burning, despite all the blood and the violence, it's really a story about us.
It's a story about the choices we make, the consequences of our actions, and the darkness that we all carry inside. And sometimes, those are the most terrifying stories of all.
And on that note, I think it's time to bring this deep dive to a close.
Until next time.